All right, I am in my kitchen today. My oven is fired up on 500 degrees with a cast iron Dutch oven in it, and that is because we're gonna make some sourdough bread. Now, you know that I have a few recipes here on my channel for sourdough bread. The no knead recipe is probably my absolute favorite that I get the best results from, but I wanna share how to actually make the bread beautiful. I get lots of questions about how to score it. What are the tips for actually making it have that photographic, beautiful Instagram type of bread? Now, it does not have to be. Ultimately, we're after sustenance. I get it. A lot of times that's the kind of bread I'm making, but it is so fun just to put a creative and artistic spin on bread. And personally, I am super excited today because I made 6 loaves yesterday that are in the refrigerator doing their final rise in the refrigerator, and I cannot wait to spend some time scoring them and making them beautiful. So it is almost like a hobby. If nothing else, this is a hobby. Even if you're not gonna take any pictures of it, totally fine. It is just fun to bring out of the oven something so beautiful, and I absolutely love that whole process. I'm gonna share with you some of my tips for that because it took me a long time to figure out how to even make the bread beautiful. You can hear Theodore in the background. He's letting me lay him down on a blanket right now, so I'm gonna work like as fast as I can while he's doing that, and then he's gonna be in the wrap very soon, I'm sure. So first, let's start with some of the pre-baking and scoring tips that help to achieve success on making the bread beautiful. The first one is, of course, all right, time for the wrap, is to have a super active starter. Now, this is only something that can happen with time and lots of feedings, but in order to achieve that beautiful oven spring, which is how your bread will rise while in the oven, which will make those cuts that you scored open up and make it so beautiful, you need to have an active starter. And that is a lot of times one of the biggest mistakes that I find people making is trying to make bread before it's active. Now, people ask me, how do you know? Well, you can try the float test, but a lot of times just experimenting with bread baking is what will tell you. Don't worry if you end up with loaves that aren't the best. They're not fluffy, they're not that great. Just make them into croutons or French toast casseroles. Those are a wonderful way to use that bread, no matter how well it rose or didn't. Okay, another key, which I did not learn this for many, many years of my sourdough journey, is to refrigerate the dough overnight. This really allows you to slash into the dough without smashing it. So whenever it has been refrigerated, it has more of that structure that you can actually slash into without damaging the entire shape of the loaf. And it just makes the cuts prettier and more even. And I find I could never make loaves as beautiful as ones that I refrigerated overnight. Plus, it's really nice because you get all the stretching and folding done on one day, and then the next day you get to do all the fun part, which is what I get to do today. Another tip is to make sure that your bread baking vessel, in my case, a cast iron Dutch oven, is preheated and ready before pulling the loaves out of the refrigerator and scoring. You want to go straight from scoring to baking in just a small amount of time. This helps the cuts to not flatten out and make the result of what you drew more predictable. Now let's dive into some of my favorite scoring patterns. I am going to just be baking one loaf after the next, and we will talk through it and see how they all turn out. A few tips for the actual scoring. You want to use something that is really sharp. I've tried scoring with just a knife, and the results definitely left something to be desired. Now, if the knife is extremely sharp, that could work really well. You can also get a lame or a lame and put a blade right on it, like this. Fresh blade works great. I find that I have better control with just a razor in my hand. Now, the key is to get a whole bunch of these. I order packs of these razors, because as soon as they're dull, they just don't work as well, and the design just isn't as pretty. So having a sharp razor is key. Another thing that I like to do is to add a little bit of flour to the top of my loaf before cutting for that color contrast. This makes it to where it's white, and then when the design opens up, it really stands out. Now, there are 2 types of scores. One's expansion scores. Now, this is a cut that is a little bit more deep than your artistic scores. These allow the bread to expand when you're getting that nice oven spring. Examples of this would be like a half moon, slash, or a cross hatch, or a cross. I'll be showing you all of that momentarily. The other type of scoring is an artistic score. This just provides that pretty design. You'll cut a little bit less deep, so whenever I'm doing my expansion scores, which you don't necessarily have to do, but if you don't have enough artistic scores, you will find that your bread might blow out in some areas where you hoped that it wouldn't. So doing those expansion scores really help to allow the bread to expand. Now the artistic scores are like the wheat pattern. You don't want to cut these as deep, but you do want to cut them uniformly. I have found that whenever I am making a wheat pattern and I make some of the slashes a little bit less and some of them a little shorter, the mistake isn't obvious on the pre-baked bread, but once it all opens up, it becomes quite obvious. The first pattern I'm doing today is probably my absolute favorite. This is just a wheat pattern with a half moon expansion type of score. And on this side, I'm gonna do my big slash. I'm gonna cut quite a bit deeper than I did on the wheat pattern and just kind of carry it around. Now this here, this is called an ear, and you definitely want that. This is a good sign that everything went well during the process, but it'll still be just as delicious if that doesn't happen. On the next loaf, I'm gonna try a wheat pattern with a square. This basket definitely yielded kind of a lumpy bread, but we'll see how it turns out anyways. First I'm gonna slash the square. Do this a bit deeper than I do my wheat pattern. Now this is actually beautiful all on its own, or you can add an additional detail like I'm gonna do here. I didn't give myself a whole lot of space, so I probably should have given myself more in the center of the square, to be honest, but we'll try it anyway. Another factor in making bread truly beautiful is removing the lid from the Dutch oven. If you're using a Dutch oven, which I highly recommend because it provides steam, gives it that beautiful crust. If you remove the lid halfway between baking, it allows that crust to get brown and beautiful. And that's when you really start to see your design stand out. This one, I'm gonna show you a simple cross, but I'm of course gonna add my wheat because I always like that. Really quick, I want to point out, you can see how much oven spraying happens because this is how flat they look coming out of the baskets, and then they poof up like this in the oven. Let's rub it with a bit of flour. Cross it. Now this would look pretty, again, all on its own. I just like getting a little bit extra fancy. not thinking that's gonna turn out so good. I wanted to just do the wheat patterns, but I was afraid that with the oven spring I've been getting on these loaves, that it would explode out. That's not really the right word. That it would break in a certain spot where I didn't want it to. So I'm hoping these side splashes prevent that. I also did not mean for this turn into this. Not what I prefer to happen. So that's not gonna look good. So we'll see how this one turns out. That is the thing with making this bread, is lots of experimentation, and no matter what, beautiful or not, it'll be delicious. Let's talk about a few mistakes that cause the bread to not have that oven spring, which really helps to give it that final rise in the oven. It causes your design to open up and stand out. So one mistake can be over fermentation. This is counterintuitive. You think if the longer I ferment it, the bigger it'll get, but at some point it falls flat. And if you really over ferment it, your bread will turn from a nice structured dough to one that is really soupy and basically just spreads out. And you really can't save it once it gets to that point. No amount of flour will really help that. So there is a lot of trial and error with bread baking, and you will know what you're looking for, but basically you want it to double in size. So the other mistake is under fermentation. This can be the result of a starter that isn't very active. Could just mean that your starter needs a few more weeks or months of feeding and maintaining. It could also just be that it was too cold in your house and the bread didn't have enough time to rise. Personally, I put my bread by the wood stove. I just sit it on a chair, not right by it because it would bake the outside edges of it, but just a little set back a little bit. Depending on how hot the fire is, I'll just kind of feel. I know that I want it to be probably around 80-ish degrees. In the summer, I can pretty much leave it anywhere in the kitchen. It is pretty warm and it will rise in a reasonable amount of time there. Now, if it's really chilly in your house, you might just need a lot more time for that bulk ferment, which is the rise that happens after you do all your stretch and folds. Other factors could be the oven temperature being too hot. Sometimes people tell me that the bottom of their loaves are burned or that their bread was burned. This could just be the natural variation in ovens. Sometimes it pays to actually test and see what temperature your oven is. Some ovens do run a little bit hotter and some a little bit cooler, so you'll want to figure out what works best for you. But if the oven is too hot, you might not get as much oven spring as you're hoping for. Another factor could of course be that the oven is too cold. I realize that this sounds finicky, but you will get a groove. And like I said, all bread that doesn't turn out perfectly can be made into croutons, so it's never a total waste. I never throw away any bread that we bake in this house. Other factors could be too much water, too much flour. Again, you'll get a feel for the dough. It really is something that goes by feel because your starter could be more hydrated. Factors in the environment or the flour that you're using could cause it to be a wetter dough or a drier dough, depending on those factors. Again, for my full recipe where I walk you through the entire process from measuring out the flour and the starter, making a starter, I have that as well, to the stretching and folding and baking, you can check out my no knead sourdough bread video and blog post. I will leave links for that recipe down in the description box below. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you feel a little bit more confident in trying your hand at some of those artistic, beautiful sourdough breads. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you're brand new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like if you enjoyed this video. I have so many sourdough recipes and videos here on my channel. I even have a free ebook where I share all of my favorite sourdough recipes. You can print it off and enjoy using them in your kitchen. You can get those at bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough. Thank you so much for stopping by the farmhouse.